Hi, Lou Pulsfer here to talk today about the part that creativity plays in game design. The answer is not a big part. First, I'm going to quote from my book, Game Design. Creativity is an important but small component of game design. Most of the work involved in the game is fairly straightforward thinking and problem solving. This is not to say that it's easy, but it does not involve a great deal of creativity. Novice game designers often have a confused idea that game design is all about creativity, which is very far from the truth. Now here are some quotes about game design, also from the book. Pablo Picasso: all children are artists. The problem is how to remain an artist once he grows up. Abraham Maslow: the key question isn't what fosters creativity, but it is why in God's name isn't everyone creative? Where was the human potential lost? How was it crippled? I think therefore a good question might be not why do people create, but why do people not create or innovate? We have got to abandon that sense of amazement in the face of creativity, as if it were a miracle if anybody created anything. And that's probably the general point I want to make here, that you don't need to be a terrifically creative person to design a good game. And the last quote here: before you think outside the box, check inside the box first. Mark Rosewater, who is the designer not of the original Magic the Gathering, but of the current versions of it. So creativity can be misunderstood. Creativity in game design, anyway, is mostly not about getting ideas. It's not brain fever. It's not wild imagination. Anybody can come up with nutty, off-the-wall stuff. No, creativity is about finding unusual ways to solve problems. Not necessarily unique. Not necessarily flashy. Let me give you an example. I think I heard this on a TED Talk by Dan Ariely. Someone who is known to be a creative person, I think, was in an office and was smoking, and there were no ashtrays. So he had a problem. He solved it very simply. He took a 3x5 card, and of course you usually find those in offices, turned up all the edges and used that as an ashtray. That's a creative solution to a problem. And that's what game designers need, is that kind of creative solutions to problems. Too many people think creativity is all there is to game design. And it has to be said, the sexy part of game design is the conception and elaboration of an idea that may turn into an enjoyable game. The rest of it is not sexy. It takes a long time to test and modify a game, and it gets to be really unfun toward the end of that time. So sexy in game design is like sexy in marriage. It can only make a difference at the beginning, and sooner or later there has to be a lot more there, or you're not going to end up with a good game, just like you're not going to end up with a good marriage. Game design, like long-term marriage, depends on a lot more than this sexy part. I think a lot of so-called game designers want the equivalent of a convenient girlfriend-boyfriend relationship, a you-know-what buddy. They want the most fun parts without the work that makes it last, makes a relationship last. You can try and do this, but what you'll end up with is a lot of half-done and usually half-baked games that will not be published unless you publish it yourself. It's also not unusual for people who call themselves designers to complain that constraints limit their creativity. That's actually the opposite of the truth. In art generally, as well as in game design, constraints promote creativity because you work harder to find solutions to your problems. In eras where there are no rules, such as the Rococo in music or modern painting, you generally don't end up with lasting masterpieces. Some could argue with me about that in painting because we haven't had a long enough time. When you can do anything, it's really hard to decide what to do. You need to consider the constraints, and that will help you make a better game. You always have a target audience, for example, whether you know it or not. You may not think of it in your head, but it's there. Constraints breed creativity. They don't interfere with it. Now, what about creativity versus execution? Well, you can be creative in lots of different ways, but if you don't execute the overall game, if you don't have a willingness to stick with it until the end and you're bloody sick of it, then you're not going to come up with a good game. And maybe somebody else will do that work and the game will be great in the end, but it will be your work plus somebody else's. Adams and Rollings in Game Design Fundamentals suggest that creativity or innovation by the game designer amounts to 5% of the fun in a game, or if you include stage or level design, up to 14%. My formulation is a modified form of something Thomas Edison said, and that is success is 10% inspiration and 90% perspiration. Success in game design is 10% inspiration and 90% perspiration. Now, Edison said 1% and 99%, but he was famous for using trial and error. In other words, guess at a solution and then check the results. And that's why he perhaps discounted inspiration. What about talent? Some people certainly have a talent for designing games and some people certainly don't. So inborn talent may make the difference between a decent game and a good game. But it's also a craft that can be learned, not something that only a few lucky individuals can do. The necessary creativity is in most of us, we just need to bring it out or bring it back in Picasso and Maslow's terms. Execution counts for far more in game design than creativity. If there is no creativity, then you're probably not going to get much of a game. But creativity is not the major part of the equation. Now, some of the material here I've quoted from my book, Game Design, How to Create Video and Tabletop Games Start to Finish. McFarland, 2012. It's available inexpensively at Amazon and at other online bookstores in paper and electronic formats.